Some say that happiness equals reality minus expectations. Is this true? And how does it apply to your finances with your significant other? Keep listening as we dive in. Welcome to the Money Meets Medicine podcast, where we talk all about the personal finance topics you wish you had learned in medical school. I'm your host, Justin Harvey, and here is your co-host, who recently took all social media and email off of his phone, Dr. Jimmy Turner.
Yeah, I took a big jump. You know, listeners know I've talked about the light phone in the past, and like my intentions. Some say that, you know, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. I have lots of good intentions to like spend more time with my family and be more present. So I bought a light phone. It is now like all it does is like call and text. I think it has like maps and maybe podcasts on it, and it sits as like a brick in my drawer in my my bedroom. I.e., I never use it, so I gave up on that. And then, you know, started kind of thinking more about this. And, you know, I decided like, hey, look, maybe there's a more reasonable alternative that doesn't get rid of like the camera on a phone that I need with like little kids or like Google Maps. And so, yeah, I deleted all social media and email. And I'll be honest with you, it's actually been quite a wonderful thing. Like I actually do a better job checking my email when I check it because it's the only thing that I'm doing. And like I just save everything for that one time. I do it like once a day, twice a day. And this is actually an extension. This kind of blows people's mind. I've mentioned this a bunch on the show, but I've for like 4 years, not checked my work email for the hospital unless I am literally on premises. And so people know, like, if I need Jimmy acutely, I need to call or text him. And if it's something that can wait, but I just want to put on his radar so that he doesn't forget, I'm going to email him. And so there might be like 6 or 7 days in between me checking my email at work. And so I kind of like waded into the waters, and now I'm just like, yeah, I just jumped like cannonball style, like straight into the pool.
Yeah, and interestingly, you know, people treat you the way that you let them. And I have friends with varying levels of responsiveness, and I have sort of adjusted my expectations of when are they going to text me back, when are they going to email me back. I've handicapped it based on how they have trained me, and you know what? That works. And if we get to a place where our relationship is starting to suffer, I'll be like, bro, you got to return my call or else we can't be friends because I can't ever talk to you. But short of that, it's actually, I think you make a great point, and people will maybe be surprised that you don't have to be like, have your phone like hardwired into your brain in order to subsist in today's society.
You know, I was telling you before the show that like there's like this low level anxiety or stress that just kind of constantly exists from like notifications going off, like the dopamine hit, and like eventually it's just, you know, like you almost like need that dopamine hit for like likes and comments and all that other stuff.
Yeah. That
you don't realize is there until you stop doing it. Right. And so like for me, like it was a pretty acute change. Like 2 or 3 days later, I was like, wow, like I actually am a lot more at peace and like content. And like, I don't feel like I need to check this thing all the time. And to your point about like communication, that actually dovetails perfectly into the show, right? Because as we mentioned, happiness is reality minus expectations. And on this show, we're going to talk about significant others. And honestly, a huge part of this comes down to what are your expectations? What are their expectations? And, you know, are your expectations the same as your partner's or at least aligned? And if not, how does that cause conflict, and how can we kind of get back on the same page? So we're going to discuss all that and more on this show. Before we dive in, as always, if you want to snag a free copy of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance, or you want someone else to that you know would benefit from that, they can do that at moneymeetsmedicine.com, where you can also get a quote for own occupation disability insurance, the number one task for doctors. Paying down debt and investing don't matter if you don't have an income. So every doctor needs it. If you need a quote for that, you can go to moneymeetsmedicine.com. So Justin, when I was in college, my best friend's dad told me before I got married, he's like, Jimmy, you want to know the 3 reasons that people get divorced? And I said, sure, lay it on me, right? And he's like, the 3 B's. He's like, the bedroom, the bank account, and bearing children. He's like, if you have different expectations in any of those 3 arenas, there's a really good chance you're going to end up getting divorced. And for whatever reason, despite having a horrifically bad memory, that has always stuck with me. And like really laid the foundation for like having important conversations with Kristen, you know, both before we got married and now, being married, about our expectations, you know, with raising our kids, or, you know, how we're going to spend our money. And so I think this comes up a lot for people. And if it doesn't come up a lot, it's kind of like that thing that, you know, just kind of festers in the background until like it just, like a volcano, it just explodes because no one ever dealt with it. So I think this is a really important topic to discuss. Is that your experience advising people too?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the reasons that I do what I do and why I'm so passionate about like helping physician families is to sort of protect them from the ill effects of, frankly, a lot of it is just protect them from the ill effects of not communicating about big money decisions. And when you add another 0 or 2 to those money decisions, it does sometimes turn up the volume on the emotional engagement with those. And, I remember, and you probably remember, Jimmy, when you're in residency, there is sort of a built-in shared sense of mission you have with your spouse. You're like, I need to survive. We need to make sure the kids don't starve. We got to make sure the rent gets paid. And there's probably not as much existential angst about there's stress around money, especially if, it's a one income household and you have kids and you're making, your $58,000 a year or whatever. But I find that there's a more cohesive sort of mutual understanding than once you're an attending for 3, 5, 10 years and there's economic abundance. And then all of a sudden, that's where things go sideways if you're not proactive in creating some systems to communicate, have transparency in ways that are important, and, establish mutual understanding.
Yeah. So it actually, there's a name for this, right? It's called Parkinson's Law. Have you heard of that before?
No. I don't know. Maybe.
So Parkinson's Law is this idea that, given the context, whatever we're talking about will like gas, fill the shape of the container, right? So examples, when you have a giant thing of toothpaste, right? Like you just slap the glob on there and you just go to town, right? But then as it gets down, every human being in the world, no matter how much money you have, just every, nook and cranny until you get that last piece of toothpaste out on that last day, you're all working for it. And the reason you work harder is because you have less available, right? It's the same reason I made better grades when I was in season in college for soccer. I had a limited amount of time, so I knew the time that I was off the pitch, I needed to be studying, right? Whereas when I was in spring and I wasn't in season, I was I could probably go play, beach volleyball for a couple hours, and my grades were actually worse. And so I think when you're telling me about hey, actually you're have this shared aligned mission when you're in residency and your finances are tight, right? And then you finish and all of a sudden, finances are, not necessarily flush, but definitely more abundant. And all of a sudden you're it's probably fine if I do this. And the conversations aren't as significant. They don't happen as often. And so Parkinson's Law is what the name is for that. It's the same reason why I procrastinated in college. And same reason this becomes difficult, but just so that people aren't, let's just put some context to this, right? So this, I think it was really important to me in building the show, doing some research for it to kind of discuss, what does the data say? What are the stats behind, this conversation such that, Justin, it's not your bias or my bias that's leading the show. Obviously, we're going to have opinions of our own. But before we dive into that, there's actually some really interesting studies out there. So the American Institute of CPAs, which I didn't even know was a thing until I did this research, basically showed that half American couples experience financial tension and say that it's got a negative impact on their intimacy, and that 7 in 10 married or cohabiting Americans have had a disagreement with their partner about finances in the last year. And that ultimately 40% of relationships end if there's what they call financial infidelity. There's a lack of transparency, or you just racked up, 15 grand of credit card debt and didn't tell me. Right. And so there's more studies on this, right? Younger adults, our listeners on Money Meets Medicine, basically the ages of 18 to 54, we're almost twice as likely to cite money as the top stressor in their relationship. And so this is a really, really important topic, whether you're, dating and you're in a committed relationship with your partner, you're engaged, you're married, you're living together, whatever it happens to be. It's not just your experience, Justin, and my experience that says this is important. The data, the studies out there actually back this up.
Yeah. And certainly anecdotally, yes, I observe those things. And I was actually talking to a friend last night. Some of my more sort of sober reflections on my job are the times when I question, did I do the best I could to avert disaster in terms of the communication and facilitating that and creating a system to permit that to flow as freely as possible between spouses? Because, I've had clients get divorced and, or other, circumstances, significant hardship in marriage that are, money is always one of the sort of negotiating chips. And I take this very, very seriously. I view it as one of the most important things that I do is help spouses figure this stuff out.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And, maybe the first place to start on this one is, because I think it's really important to me on Money Meets Medicine that we don't avoid taboo topics or challenging subjects or things that might be, let's say, controversial, or, there's a big difference of opinion among people. And so, like, I'm not going to dodge this one, right? Like, if we're going to talk about relationships and we're going to talk about, being aligned with your partner financially, the most common question that I hear is, hey, should we share bank accounts? And I find this one fascinating because, like, from my just personal perspective, I didn't even know people didn't share bank accounts until I started, like, blogging and podcasting about personal finance. Like, it never would have even crossed my mind that a married couple would not have a joint bank account. And I'm just going to throw that out there. That's my bias, my perspective, the experience that I brought to the table. And so, again, researching for the show, I was like, hey, maybe this is just Jimmy's bias, and maybe, this idea that people should have a joint bank account, like what's yours is mine sort of thinking, like maybe I'm just like way off the deep end and like I'm the oddball. And so, looking into this, was actually a study published. It was, I think, by a professor from the University of Indiana, and it was in like the last 12 months. Forbes did an article on it. There's a bunch of other publications. You can go look this up. I'll put the reference both in the blog post that accompanies each show. There's one that's going to accompany this show, and also if you want to click the link on the podcast description. But basically, they broke it up into 3 groups, Justin. So it's basically merging finances, separating accounts, or doing nothing, like just whatever they came in doing. Right. And so that was their control group. And when they look back at this, couples who kept separate accounts or had no intervention experienced the usual decline in relationship quality over time, which I find very interesting. And then couples who merged their finances were shielded from this decline. This was mainly due, they thought, to improved financial harmony among couples with joint accounts, resulting in less conflict and higher satisfaction with money management by both partners. So I found this to be a really interesting thing because I know, having blogged and podcasted in this arena, that there is, I want to say the numbers are like 20% of couples keep separate accounts. And 4 in 10 share everything. So like sometimes they have a joint account, but then like, I pay this bill, you pay that bill, sort of thing. Like, so there's all of these varying degrees of like joint account, like your money is my money, and like we'll just, everything's together, versus joint account and you're responsible for different things, and then completely separate accounts, like you do you, boo, and that sort of thing. So what do you think about that study? Or just like, what are your general thoughts now that I'm throwing this out there? Because I don't help families manage money like you do.
This is one of the questions I love to ask people is, tell me something you've changed your mind about over time. I would say that this falls into that category for me. The short answer to my response to the study is, it's interesting. To me, it sounds like I have a correlation causation question about that. I think that people who merge are probably like thinking pretty intentionally about communication to begin with. And there's probably other areas in which it's probably more important, the way they're communicating about these things and the way they're pursuing transparency and like having open dialogue. That is ultimately the driver. So that's what I think is probably happening there, but we could debate that or cite other studies to try to confirm or deny. I will say that I originally had the same perspective you just articulated. Like, if you're going to be married, part of what that means is we're in the same boat, we're rowing the same direction, and a joint account is like the best way to go. I wouldn't say the only way to go, but I would have said the best way. I have modified that opinion after working with a lot of families and seeing some who I believe are committed to honest dialogue and transparency, but for whom only one joint checking and one joint savings, it introduces what I'll call an unnecessary level of friction. And I'll call it also an unnecessary level of transparency. Like a friend of mine once said, if you're going to build a good friendship, you want to give someone the real you, but you don't need to give them the full you. Because the full you is kind of overwhelming. And like, do I need to get a notification on my phone if my wife, buys a latte at Starbucks that says, thanks for spending $5.56? Or is that just going to make me be like, geez, was that $5.56 best spent at the coffee shop? I mean, I don't care about that objectively, but I would say there are people out there for whom that's just a trigger to say like, it creates a point of conflict unnecessarily. So I like joint accounts. I think joint accounts with separate credit cards can be a way to like introduce one layer of, you can look at your spouse's credit card if you need to, if it's like $2,500 a month, $2,500 a month, $2,500 a month, and then, oh my gosh, a $7,800 credit card bill. Like, I want to see what the heck is going on. It's good to be able to engage at that level, but I don't want to see the transactions because I don't care. And I feel like the economic progress of my household is not impaired at our current levels of spend. And I think that for other families, finding the Goldilocks solution, what is the not too opaque, not too transparent, but just right, sometimes it does look like individual accounts. One further thing, and then I want to hear what you have to say about this, is, and this is another, I guess, thing that I came to over time after getting to know a couple specific clients and understanding like the cultural context, different nationalities, different like household upbringings, abuse, like, oh my gosh, if mom didn't like squirrel away $200 in the mattress, like we would have never had the money to get away from dad when I was 9 and stuff like that, where you're like, okay, yeah, like a joint account for everything for everyone. I mean, you could argue about whether the doctor who came from those circumstances is still best served by a joint account. Maybe they are, but there's a reason that they want their own account, because like this is the only reason we survived when I was 9. So
right.
I'm not going to come in on my high horse and say like get a joint account because it's the only way married people can stay married. I have become more flexible in my old age.
I actually think that's really well said, and for me, I've definitely become more gray with nuance. And so, you just actually gave the example that I was going to say in my own household, which is, Kristen's got her Chase, Preferred. I've got my Amex Platinum, and, we have separate cards. And if there's like actually last month, we spent a little more than, let's just say typical. And so last night, literally, I love it that you're bringing up this example. Kristen's like combing through the things and she's like, hey, what is this $1,000 expense? And I was like, you remember when like we decided to go on like our 15-year anniversary and we were going to like do it right. Well, Kristen had like 400,000 points, just as an example of like me not looking at her credit card. I had no idea. She had 400,000 points. And so we're going on like this $15,000 trip for $1,000, and the $1,000 came from like upgrading to first class just because that's something that we like almost never do. 15th anniversary, like why the heck not, right?
So that is the best possible answer that you just gave to that query of what is this? It's the only $1,000 we spent on our anniversary. You're welcome.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but like, yeah. And so, but it got brought up because she was looking through it because it was abnormally large. In fact, we had to dip into our savings a little bit, if I'm being honest. And so, it was what it was, but there is a little bit of separation there between our spending. And so, you could go all the way to like a joint account with like debit cards, right? With, announcements that get, go to your Apple Watch or whatever, like where you know what each person's spending every single time, like that level of transparency to complete separation, separate accounts, separate cards. You're not even allowed to look in this thing. But what I'm hearing you say, and I have become more gray and nuanced, which, by the way, for people that are listening, they've been longtime listeners for like the last 3 years. I think that's actually a beneficial thing. And just, I'm going to get on my soapbox for 1 second to like explain why as an example. There are people in the financial space, very, very well-known people in this space that have given the same advice for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. And they have, let's say 6 or 7 steps of the way that you're supposed to do things. And those steps haven't changed. And the reason why is because their trademark, their brand is built on those steps. And so even though those steps have become wrong, they've been unwilling to change their views on them and to be nuanced about it. And so, Justin, when I hear you say as an advisor that as your time has gone on, your views have changed, they become more nuanced, they become more gray, and that a lot of situations, guess what? They just depend because personal finance is personal. If someone's listening, like I personally view that as a strength and not a weakness. It's not that you were wrong or that I was wrong. It's that, we have changed our views as more information has come in and we've had more experience. I personally view that as a strength. So I just want to toss that out there.
Thanks. I think I highly value intellectual humility and like to think I have some modicum of it, and I'm always trying to, serve my clients and my family better. So thanks for saying that.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you earlier, and I wrote this down myself, is that regardless of the route that you choose, right, it's really about conversation, which is, that causality piece you kind of pointed out before. You're like, well, I bet that the people that merged their accounts probably had conversations potentially about it, which led them to be, likely to merge, regardless of what it was. I agree that the number one thing is having these discussions, and a huge red flag to me is when someone's like not only not willing to be like transparent at all, but like they're unwilling to have conversations about this stuff. And so I know that you sent me this article, so I'll let you talk about it in a second, but the exercise I love walking people through or having them do on their own, I kind of have it like, I call it a know your why dinner, which is to go through the 3 Kinder questions. That's KINDER. And those 3 questions basically walk you through, like what would your lifestyle look like? What would you be doing? How would you be spending your time if you had an infinite amount of money? Right? That's the first question. The second question is like, hey, you're going to die. It's going to be the next 5 to 10 years. Could be day 1 of year 5 or the last day of year 10, but you're going to die. Money is not infinite anymore, right? Like you just have the same amount of money you have right now. Like what would you do? What would you spend your time doing? What would you stop doing? Right? And then the last question is, hey, you're going to die in the next 24 hours. Looking back, what are you really glad that you accomplished? What do you regret not having done? Like what is the legacy you leave? Like what's important? And when you go through those 3 questions in order, which I encourage people to do individually, like go through those 3 questions, write down your answers, have your partner do the same thing, and then go on a date, go on a money date. It's not sexy, but it's really important. Go on a money date, sit down, have that conversation and talk through those 3 answers. And you'll find that you're not actually going to be talking about money, right? You're going to be talking about all the things that are important to you and having that aligned vision. I think that broader, bigger picture it's so important to start with the end in mind, which is ultimately what that is, right? Money is just a means to an end. It's not the end itself. Answering those 3 questions will tell you what the end is.
Totally. And I've been a big fan of George Kinder's work. I've done some trainings with him, and I lean on some of the tools he's created to serve my clients. I think these are really important conversations. I mean, it's hard to give good advice if you don't understand how people engage with these values level queries. But I totally agree that excavating these things from your spouse. Some of the best moments that I've had as an advisor is when I'm facilitating these conversations and, Dr. Smith says whatever. And then, other Dr. Smith looks over and says like, really? That? Like even people who've been married for a while, they don't, just in the course of life and you get in your routine, you don't, if you don't have if you don't have an above average level of intentionality, often these conversations will never come up. And so really important content like this can go unexcavated for quite some time. And it's a great opportunity to be better aligned with your spouse on really important things. And if you're talking about like kids and, there's different like epochs of your life. If you're dating and thinking about the commitment, then there's sort of a round of those types of questions. And like when you got like right now I've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and it's like, what do we think about what education is going to look like? Or what are we thinking about real estate? Big financial commitments that are going to take years to work toward and plan for and are going to impact spending decisions today. Those conversations have to happen in order to serve your family well, not build resentment, and make sure that, that you started talking about happiness. Like, this is a way to be more happy, is to have open channels of communication on these topics.
Yeah, totally. And something that people might be thinking of as you're talking about that and the comments that I just made, and I hear this all the time. Hey, Jimmy, my partner doesn't care about money, right? And so like, they're like, they have no interest in talking about it. And so I don't know even how do I have these conversations? Like, I want to be aligned financially, but like, it's a non-starter. And for those people, I actually give the same advice that I give to like 2 people that do care about money, right? And like want to discuss these things, which is that these conversations, when they start and honestly, when they continue, should focus much, much more on the high level. Where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish? Right? Like, don't bring an Excel sheet to a financial date, if you will, and like break out the numbers and be like, see, honey, like this is where we spent, $47.26 on this one thing. And, I don't think that expense was necessary, right? Like that's not ever going to go well. What you can do is sit down and make sure that your visions are still aligned, which I agree with you, Justin. Like one of the hallmarks of Kristen, our marriage, right, and our family is that we try to be intentional about everything, right? And at the top of the show, I gave an example of that. I had a kid tell me, one of my kids say, "Hey daddy, why do you pay more attention to your phone than you pay attention to me?" Right. And so
Dagger.
very quickly, right, that became a priority, right? Like, okay, wow, I just got called out by my 7-year-old. And so I am going to figure out how to solve this problem, right? Like my kid shouldn't feel that way. And if I'm being honest, like this isn't just her perception of reality. This is me holding my phone, typing a tweet or answering an email and her coming up, showing me a picture from school and me saying, hold on, right? Like that, and I'm not blaming anybody that's done that because 100% of the people listening, if you have children, have done that. What I am saying is that we chose to be intentional. And I chose to get rid of social media and to get rid of my email on my phone. So that's not a temptation. I don't even know where my phone is half the time over the last week. And so same thing, be intentional with your marriage, be intentional with raising kids, be intentional with your finances in your marriage, in your committed relationship, in your partnership, wherever you happen to be on that journey. Don't bring the Excel sheet, right? So just keep it big picture. I think that's super helpful.
And you've probably seen, and I know I have, like there's an antagonistic relationship, and money can sometimes be one of the levers that a spouse will use to express passive aggression. And
Sure.
Maybe you are this spouse, or maybe you're married to this spouse. And I've got clients like this, and I've got clients who are clients expressly because they need their spouse to stop spending so much, and they don't want to be the one to tell them that. They need a neutral third party. So I would say this is an opportunity to consider, the same way that you don't try to solve your own marriage problems, you go to a counselor to like be the referee. When you're having kind of intense money problems or conversations, it starts as just a conversation. And if you don't have the sort of baseline goodwill, if we're being honest, like a lot of marriages, they go through ebbs and flows. And if you don't have the sort of the bank of emotional investment with your partner where they're going to be able to come to the table.
Line of credit.
Yes. And they're going to come assuming the best, and you're going to be able to be honest, and they can be honest, and you can not have like a hand grenade go off on the table. If you're not at that place, then bringing in someone else, whether it is frankly, it could be a marriage counselor, and I'm a big believer in that. But it could also be a financial advisor who has some emotional intelligence to help quarterback these conversations and can help structure and be the quote unquote bad guy or girl. If you need somebody to like say, was that really here's the great thing about my job too, is I don't need to make a judgment. I just say you want to save 27%, you're saving 4%. How do you feel about that? And then see what happens in the conversation. And if there is a malalignment of values, then we need to, do some negotiating and some exploration to say, spending spouse, if you're not the earner, do you want your spouse to work until they're 74 years old? Or how do you reckon with that? And then, there's some deep work that needs to happen there, but it's got to start somewhere. And this is one place where sometimes it does start.
Yeah. And I think pointing out all those levers, right? I love how the example that you gave off the bat is like, hey, you're spending X amount of dollars, and that, that's potentially fine. Like the option is that your partner could, work until 75. Right. And like putting it in the context of like that is a lever. Like that's an option. It may not be the option that you want to choose, but it is an option, right? They can pick up extra shifts, right? And then not be home on the weekends. It's a lever. Or, there are other levers. Like we could, talk about spending less money and accomplish these goals that we set out to. But I agree with you that line of credit is so important. And really it all boils down to like that original equation, right? Happiness is reality minus expectations. Like if you can set your expectations and have your reality at least closely approximate what the expectations are that you set, you're going to be relatively happy in your financial alignment. But it all comes down to those expectations, which need to be set, build that line of credit that you mentioned, but also need to be continually revisited, right? Like it's important to do that. And actually, praise God, hallelujah. My oldest is now old enough. She can babysit. And so like, we're finally at a point in our life where like we have a permanent in-house babysitter, and we're like, hey, Grace, we're going to go on a date and we need you to watch the two younger kids. You have your phone, call us if you need us. We pay her $20 an hour. And then every time I hand her the money, it's a different episode for a different day. I hand her the, $80 and I say, hey, how much of this do you want to go to your car? Right. So my daughter, she has a parental match. So if she gives me $20, I put 60 into the account, and that's going to continue to invest while, until she turns 16. And at which point she gets to afford whatever kind of car she's been able to afford, right? I put some money in there up front, and then the rest of it's going to be up to Grace to, be a lifeguard or whatever. But all that to say, like, we are very intentional and pay our kid. Like, that's money out of my pocket that goes to an account to pay for a car, so that we can go on dates regularly. Right. It used to be a babysitter, by the way. It cost much more because they're watching 3 kids. They were younger, but yeah, be intentional about it. Pay for it. Invest in your relationship. It's important.
Yeah. And there's a couple, I think, key sort of markers that it's helpful to agree upon. And I find if you're in like the dating and exploration of like, is this person going to be a partner phase, a couple of fun questions to ask. And this is also, I think, sourced from that link that I sent you, the New York Times.
Yep.
Which is like, how much is the most you could ever spend on a pair of shoes? You learn something about somebody by the way they answer that question. And it's interesting because, there's are we talking functional? Are we talking style? Are we talking statement? Like, I'm going to say something by walking into this cocktail party with those on my feet. Or how much is the most you could spend on a house? Yeah. So, and everybody's got their own number, and there's no right or wrong answer. But if you're on a first date with somebody who could spend $900 on a pair of shoes, what goes into that, and is that okay with you? And if they're making $1 million a year, they can spend as much as they want. But that's like one of those questions. Or how much could you spend on a house? Or a couch is another one. How much would you spend on a couch? Because it could be $400 on Facebook Marketplace. A car, yeah, that's another one.
For me, it's a car.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but getting some of these like everyday types of expenses and some feedback around them just says something about what this person envisions their life looking like. And I find it can really, if you're on your second drink on your first date and you feel like just going for it, see what this yields.
Yeah, Kristen's. So I am a car guy, as everyone on the show knows. So I drive a 4V Blackwing. It's a manual transmission sedan. And so like I went and drove a Porsche 911 the other day, and it was used, but I was like, hey, like, it'd be kind of cool to have like a top down kind of car, that I could drive around every once in a while. Previously I had a Boxster. I really liked it, but it only had 2 seats. I have 3 kids, so it needs at least 4. That didn't work. Hey, Jimmy, can you go pick up the kids? Actually, it turns out that I can't. So I sold it like 4 months later. And so that was something I did 2 years ago. And so like I started looking at cars again, and like immediately Kristen's like, please stop. Like, it's the going joke. If you ask my kids and my family, how long does dad hang on to a car? They'll be like 3 years, just 3 years. And so every time I go in, they're like, hey, do you want a warranty? I'm like, I'm gonna be honest with you. No. And the reason why is not just a financial reason. It is because I know that the chance that I'm going to use this warranty by the time it expires is 0, and I'm going to be buying a new car. Although I like my Blackwing, I can't imagine selling it. I can't imagine adding a second car, which is where Kristen's like, no, like, you're not getting another car. So that is a battle to be fought for another day. Attending physician problems.
Yes, indeed.
Well, everyone, I hope that. Oh, actually, Justin, you had other questions. Like, what were the other ones before we peace out? You asked about the shoes question. Talked about the Kinder questions.
Another one, like, how much could you spend? How much would you want to know if I was going to spend? Like, can I just go spend $100 and you don't care? Is it 500? Is it 1,000? Is it
we used to have that
more
rule.
than that? And this is like a big trust builder where because we talked about financial infidelity. Like, if you're going to open up a credit card and run up a $15,000 balance on a line that I don't even know exists, you said 40% of the time was the stat that AICPA cited that results in divorce. What is the mutual understanding there? And in terms of, if you don't have the emotional equity to have an honest conversation and go really deep, this is a good place to start. Like, hey, partner, spouse, babe, how much do you want to know if I'm going to spend? And that's a good way to show you have skin in the game. And then to start to build some transparency around that. And hopefully it's, a reasonable threshold that isn't going to impinge on your life too much. And it can be a good foundation for more conversation.
Yeah, we totally did that during training, and then it just kind of, I don't know, at some point it went by the wayside. I probably need to bring that back in with our recent spending trends.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I'm right there with you.
Yep. Well, everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully this show was helpful in discussing kind of the data, the stats, the information about it, how you can go through some questions, help figure out some ways to have these conversations with your partner. Before we head out, don't forget, if you want to snag your free copy of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance, you can do so on moneymeetsmedicine.com, where you can also get a quote for own occupation disability insurance if you're looking for a source you can trust. We will see you next week. Cheers. Justin Harvey is a certified financial planner at APM Wealth, where he helps anesthesiologists and pain medicine physicians. Dr. Jimmy Turner is a practicing academic anesthesiologist at Wake Forest in North Carolina. He's also a licensed insurance agent. However, neither Justin or Jimmy are your financial planner, investment advisor, or insurance agent. This show is expressly for general education and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should be considered financial advice. All views expressed are solely the views of the guests on the show and do not represent the views or opinions of their employer.